And I think that's the end of my motor, or my battery. Let's see, was that my motor or my battery? Well, the lights are not flashing. Here's a way to test if you got a bad motor. I'm going to lift it up, and if it flies in any one direction, that is the motor that's gone bad. Yep, my left rear motor has gone bad. And that's what I get for flying it like that. See how you can tell that this motor is bad? When you try to take off, the quadcopter will tilt in that direction. Okay, so I'm going to replace that motor. This gives me the opportunity to show how to replace these motors. Hi, Quadcopter 101 here. Well, I went and done it. I burned out one of my motors on my Tarantula X6, specifically the back rear motor on it. And I deserved it. I was out flying this morning, and many of you might see this video. I was doing aggressive flying of the Tarantula X6 to show how this can fly in extreme maneuvers. But I just knew I was going to burn out a motor. What I was doing multiple flips. I was doing extreme climbing with the quadcopter, extreme banks. So it was inevitable that I was going to burn it out. But fortunately, you can change one of these motors rather easily. Now, a lot of you are concerned that they don't have motors specifically available yet as of the date of this video for the Tarantula X6, but that's okay. There are tons of these WL Toys V262 motors out there already, and they can be used on this quadcopter, and in fact that's what I'm going to replace this Tarantula X6 motor with a V262 motor, and it's not all that difficult. Hopefully most of you should be able to do this. In the future, when Tarantula X6 motors become available, it makes it even more easier because there's no soldering involved with the Tarantula specific motors. But in case those motors tend to be overly costly, you can keep in mind that you can also use these very cheap, about $3.50 V262 motors if you wish. Okay, the first thing you're going to need to do is to remove the propeller from the quadcopter. Now the propeller has, let's see if it's on here, if you can see it, it's removed by a single screw on its shaft there. So get yourself a Phillips, a small bottler's Phillips. It's hard to do this while filming at the same time, trying to keep it in view of the camera, but just simply remove that screw and don't lose that screw. And once you remove the propeller, so you don't lose that screw, just reinsert it back into the propeller itself. Sorry folks, there, repositioning it, and just start it in there and where you won't lose it, and put the propeller aside for now. So next thing you do is simply remove the gear. Notice the gear can easily pop out now. That will enable us to gain access. The reason why you need to remove this gear is you need to be able to gain access to the screws on the bottom of the motor. But before we remove those screws, the next thing you want to remove, where's my screwdriver, is the motor casing, and that's accessed by simply removing these two screws on each side of it. Now don't lose track of these screws. I recommend using something to keep track, like a pill case here that I got, to keep track where these screws go. Okay. Come on out of there, screw. Okay, I just threw that screw along with that casing inside the pillbox case. Okay, now we have access to the motor itself, and we notice that the motor has a white wire and a black wire. And if we look closely, we notice that the white wire is attached to the positive pole of the motor. If you look on the top of the motor, you'll notice a plus sign on it. But before we get any further, we need to remove the motor. And to remove this motor, there are two screws on the bottom of it since we've removed the gearing, we can now access. So remove those two screws. Okay, there's one more screw to remove, and it's accessed through this little screw porthole here. You got to remove that too from the bottom of the motor. Trying to keep this in focus and do this at the same time, folks. There it goes. I got it. And put it aside. Don't lose it. Okay, now that motor, let me zoom out here so we stay in focus. Now that motor can be pushed out by pushing in on the pinion gear, pushing up on the pinion gear on the bottom of the motor, and that'll push it up and out of its slot there. And you can pull it out the rest of the way with your fingers. Now notice, normally to replace this motor, all you need to simply do is unplug it and plug in a new motor and just slide it in and go in reverse and you're done, which is very easy with the the modular design of the Tarantula. But again, these motors are not yet available yet as of the date of this video. And if they do become available, I'm concerned that they might be a little costly. We'll find out when they do become available. But we can use, again, this here, let me pull out the V262 motor to show you the comparison of the two together. This is the Tarantula motor versus the V262 motor. They're nearly identical. They have almost identical the same stock number on there, with the addition of this one's one stock number higher. Now, what's the difference in the pinions? If you look at the pinions end on, they are the same size pinion, same number of teeth. Let me verify that visually. Same number of teeth in the pinion, same diameter pinion, but the pinion shaft is a little bit longer, is actually quite a bit longer on the V262 motor. That may or may not require us to make a slight modification to the quadcopter itself, but it's very easy to do. I'll show you here in a second. But again, we can use it. We notice they're the same motors. We can use these motors with the exception of this pinion shaft, which may require slight modification to the actual quadcopter itself. Now, before we do any soldering or unsoldering, we want to look at one thing here. If we look on the top of the old motor, we notice this white wire is attached to a terminal with a plus sign next to it. So we know that the white wires, if we got a white and black wire motor, the white wire always goes to the positive terminal of the replacement motor. And if we look on our V262 motor, I have to take my glasses off to get a good look at it, we notice that the positive terminal, I don't think you're going to be able to see this unless I use a super macro. Let me see if this camera supposedly has that feature. Well, there you go. See the positive terminal there? We know when we do the resoldering, we're going to want to put our white wire on the positive terminal, which is right there. Okay? Just letting you know that this motor, let me see if you can see that too with this motor. I don't know if you can see it, but it is. Take my word for it. The white wire is on the positive terminal, the plus sign, the terminal with the plus symbol beside it. Okay? And conversely, on the other motors on this quadcopter, we have red and black wires. Red and black wires on the opposite motors from this one here. So if we're replacing these motors, the red wire goes on the plus terminal. Okay, so remember, red on the plus or white on the plus. If you do it in reverse, your motor's going to spin backwards and you're going to have to open everything back up again and swap your wires. Okay, so right now, again, we noticed that this plug could simply be, if we had a Tarantula motor, all we need to do is replug a new motor in and away we go. But this one's going to require some soldering. We're first going to have to remove these wires from this motor and put them onto this motor. And to do such, I'm just going to slide this back in its holder here. It makes it easier. Gives me something to hold while I'm unsoldering. And I'm going to zoom in here, folks, to get a better picture of this. Okay, so all we got to do now is remove the wire using a soldering iron, which I've already heated. For those of you who are unfamiliar with soldering, one important point I want to make out is always clean the tip of your soldering iron before attempting to solder. You need to clean any oxidation that's on that tip there. Otherwise, your solder won't melt. If you notice that your soldering iron is not melting the solder, I can almost guarantee you need to clean your tip. Okay, and the way I clean it is I use a little bit of Comet cleanser on a sponge or on a damp cloth, and I just scour it with the Comet cleanser and then wipe it off. Other folks like to use, I've seen some folks use sandpaper to clean off the oxidation. Okay, my soldering iron tip is clean. My soldering iron is heated up and ready to go, so let's get to it here. I'm going to grasp this black wire with a tweezer and hit the pull until the wire pops off. Now I'm going to grasp this white wire with a tweezer and hit the positive pull until it pops off. And now I'm not going to discard this. I'm going to put this aside because we're going to need it later. Again, we're going to need to solder this onto the new motor. Okay, and now all I simply do is remove this old motor from its case here. Again, you got to push up on the pinion gear. Use your fingernail to push up on the pinion gear at the same time while pulling on the top, and it pops out. Okay, now we can insert our V262 motor, and I'm going to put the positive terminal, like the old motor, I'm going to point the positive terminal toward the center of the quadcopter. I'm taking a quick look. This is the positive terminal, so that we can put it back together similar to the way it was removed or taken apart. Now this is the V262 motor. Now I want you to notice something. I'm going to flip this over and see if you can see that. Notice if you look in there, notice that it's the pinion shaft is quite long. It may be bumping up against the white structure there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark it right there with a magic marker, and I'm going to take a little bit of a heated paper clip and remove a little bit of this plastic here so that I can use this motor with a larger pinion shaft. So again, all I need to do is I'm going to mark it here, folks. I have a little black magic marker, and right at that spot I put a little mark, a little V there to show where I need to remove. And I'm going to go do that right now. I'm going to pull out this motor, and you're pushing it out on the pinion shaft, pulling the motor out, and I'm going to go heat up a paper clip. Now here's the paper clip I'm going to use. I'm just going to go over to my stove. I have a gas stove here. Another thing you could do is possibly just put it up against your soldering iron here and heat it up there, but I like to get it nice and red hot. And I'm going to go over to the stove, and then I'm going to remove a little bit of that plastic, and I'll show you here in a second, folks. Okay, that plastic's been removed. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a tiny little notch I put in there, just enough to let the pinion shaft on the replacement motor slide in there if need be. So let's put in the V262 motor into its slot. Again, the plus sign, the positive sign toward the center of the quadcopter. And take a look, and if we look closely, it fits perfectly now. You have a little bit of room there to get that motor all the way in. So now all we need to do is put the motor mount holes back in, and then we're going to solder it. So let's start off with the motor mount holes. Okay, all I need to do now is take these tiny little motor mount screws, and I'm going to start with the hard one here on this side. See how it helps to have a magnetized screwdriver? It makes it much easier. There we go. That's nice and mounted. Not too tight. We don't want to strip these. Just until we feel it tighten up, we put those screws back in. And there's the second motor mount screw. And now we're going to do soldering. Again, the white wire going toward the positive terminal, which I've pointed toward the center of the quadcopter. Okay, now we're ready to do some soldering. Again, we're putting the white wire first onto the inboard side of the motor, the plus side of the motor. I got my soldering iron here, trying to steady my arm and steady the wire itself. And that should do it. Okay, so that's the white wire. Now we do the black wire. Now these wires are still tinned because I'm reusing them from the old motor. Put the black wire on the black side, melt the wire, melt the solder, and there we go. Let me double check that. I don't like what I just did there. Let's do that again. Well, it's on there good. That's good enough, as long as it's sticking. Okay, now all we need to do now is plug the wires back into their receptor hole, or receptor plug. There we go. Careful with my soldering iron so it don't fall on the floor. So we're almost ready to go, folks. All we got to do now is, I believe, simply put on our motor cover port first. Pushing the wires in. There is a lot of clearance with this thing, so there's a lot of slop in it, which is good. That allows for ventilation. There's a screw still in there. I didn't remove that screw entirely. So let's reinsert that screw to that side of the mount, and there's another screw I need from there. Reinsert that screw into the mount. So the motor is all mounted. The motor cover is mounted. So all we've got to do next is put the propeller back on, along with the propeller shaft and gear. And that's simple to do in itself. All you do is slide it in through the bottom. Pops out through the top. Then we're going to remove that propeller screw again. And just leave it on the end of our screwdriver for now. Because what we need to do is look for the mounting hole on the propeller shaft itself. We're going to turn this a bit. There's the mounting hole. And we got to line up. Let me see if the other, look for the hole that seems to be bigger than the other. I think the other side appears to be a little bit bigger. That's the one you want your screw to go into. And you just need to line it up with that as you slide this back on again. And insert your screw. Making sure this is in the picture. And that does it. Okay, that's it. We're good to go. So now all we got to do now is, we can't fly this just yet. Even though this has been repaired, we can't fly it. What we need to do is do a 5-minute run on this motor, and that's what I'm going to demonstrate next. Okay, again, it's the left rear motor we replaced, this one here. So we're going to see if this motor works, this V262 motor. Now, we don't want to fly this right away. We need to wear in the brushes on this new motor, and that means running the new motor for about 5 minutes at very low speed. Now, what I'm going to do now is bind the quadcopter to the transmitter. Okay, we're bound, and then I'm going to bring up the motors and just run them at the slowest possible speed that I can get them to go at. And there we go. Well, the new motor seems to be working, but I want to run it at the lowest possible speed. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to adjust the pitch and roll trim settings. I'm going to push the trim away or toward that the motor that we just repaired, and that allows that to run at a slower speed. So this, see how it runs at a slower speed now? Okay, we've been running at slow speed for about 5 minutes now. What we're going to do now is do a checkout test to see if this actually can lift the quadcopter. Slowly we're raising it. And yes, the fix seems to work. Okay, that's how you replace the motor. And tomorrow I'm going to take this out in the field and do low speed runs with this quadcopter to wear in that motor with gradual, gentle flying. And then I'll go a little more aggressive with it. But again, you can use a V262 motor. Just showed how to do it. It's not that difficult to do. It does require a little bit of soldering. Most of you that can handle a soldering iron can do it. Okay, Quadcopter 101. I hope you learned something here. Signing out.